Ana Whitman stood in the doorway of a rotting cabin, 73 years old with dirt under her fingernails and hope in her chest, looking at what everyone else called a dump, but what she and Harold knew would become their masterpiece. Their children hadn't spoken to them in 2 years, hadn't returned a single call or letter, and when Ana and Harold announced they were leaving their comfortable suburban life to rebuild this forgotten place in the mountains, the silence from their sons and daughter was deafening. But on this particular autumn afternoon, as golden leaves danced through the valley and smoke curled from their newly repaired chimney, 3 expensive cars wound their way up the mountain road, carrying the very people who had abandoned them, now desperate to be part of something they never believed could exist. The beginning of the end started on a Tuesday in March, 3 years before that autumn reunion, when Ana realized that neither of her sons nor her daughter had called in over a month. She stood in her kitchen in the suburbs of Denver, holding her phone, scrolling through the dates of missed connections like a detective gathering evidence of her own irrelevance. Harold found her there, tears streaming silently down her weathered cheeks, and he didn't need to ask what was wrong because he had noticed it too. The way their 3 children had slowly, methodically, removed them from their lives like pruning dead branches from a tree. David, their oldest at 48, had been the first to drift away. He worked in finance in New York, lived in a penthouse that cost more per month than Ana and Harold had paid for their entire house. And somewhere along his climb up the corporate ladder he had decided that his parents, with their simple tastes and modest means, were embarrassments at company dinners and charity galas. His calls went from weekly to monthly to quarterly, and then they stopped altogether. When Ana tried to reach him, his assistant would answer with practiced apologies about his schedule, his travel, his meetings that ran late into the night. Melissa, their daughter, 45 and living in Los Angeles, had married a television producer who looked at Harold's worn work boots and Anna's homemade sweaters with barely concealed disdain. She had 2 children that Ana and Harold had seen exactly 3 times in 8 years. Brief visits where Melissa seemed constantly anxious, checking her watch, hurrying through conversations like someone trying to finish an unpleasant chore. The last time they had spoken, Melissa had been sharp, almost cruel, telling Ana that she needed to stop calling so much, that she had her own life to live, that not everyone wanted to sit around talking about the past. Robert, the youngest at 42, had been the one Ana thought would never leave them behind. He had been their gentle child, the one who wrote poetry in high school and talked about staying close to home, about the importance of family and roots. But he had moved to Seattle, started a tech company that exploded into success, and married a woman who made it clear that Robert's humble origins were something to be overcome, not celebrated. The last email Ana had received from him, 6 months before that March morning, had been 3 lines long, formal, and distant, explaining that he needed some space to focus on his business and his new marriage. Harold, who had worked as a carpenter for 47 years before retiring, was a man of few words but deep feelings. He didn't cry that March morning when Ana finally broke down, but he held her for a long time in their kitchen, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "We raised them," he said quietly. "We loved them. We gave them everything we had. And somewhere along the way, we became people they're ashamed of." Ana pulled back to look at his face, saw the hurt there buried beneath his stoic expression, and something shifted inside her. She was 70 years old, Harold was 72, and they had maybe 15 or 20 good years left if they were lucky. Did they really want to spend those years waiting by a phone that never rang, hoping for visits that never came, shrinking themselves down to nothing in the desperate hope that their children might throw them scraps of attention? "I don't want to do this anymore," Ana said, and Harold understood immediately that she wasn't talking about crying or grieving. She was talking about the whole life they had built around waiting, around being available, around hoping. "I don't want to spend whatever time we have left like this." They talked through the night, sitting at their kitchen table with cold coffee and a lifetime of memories. Harold told Ana about something he had seen years ago, before the children were born, when they had gone hiking in the Colorado Rockies for their 5th anniversary. There had been a cabin up there, tucked into the mountainside overlooking a valley that took your breath away, and Harold had joked about buying it someday, about living somewhere so beautiful that every morning felt like a gift. Ana remembered the moment, remembered laughing and saying they had plenty of time, that maybe when they retired, when the kids were grown and settled, they could think about something like that. "I looked it up last week," Harold admitted. I don't know why, but I searched for properties in that area. That cabin, or what's left of it, it's for sale. Has been for 2 years. Nobody wants it because it's practically falling down. No road access, no utilities, nothing but a shell and about 10 acres of wild land. Ana felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. It was excitement, mixed with fear, mixed with the kind of wild hope that makes people do unreasonable things. How much? She asked. $47,000, Harold said. We could afford it if we sold this place. We'd have enough left over to buy materials, to fix it up over time. Their friends thought they had lost their minds. When Ana and Harold announced they were selling their comfortable 3-bedroom house to buy a derelict cabin in the mountains, the reactions ranged from concern to outright horror. Barbara from next door brought over pamphlets about assisted living facilities, suggesting gently that maybe Ana and Harold were having some kind of crisis, that they should talk to someone before making such a drastic decision. Don from the hardware store, where Harold had bought supplies for decades, pulled him aside and asked in a low voice if everything was okay at home, if maybe Ana was going through something, if Harold needed help. But the worst reaction, or perhaps the most painful in its absence, was from their children. Ana sent emails to all 3 of them, explaining their plan, hoping that maybe this announcement would shock them into caring, into calling, into showing some concern or interest or even disapproval. David's assistant sent back a 1-line response wishing them well. Melissa didn't respond at all. Robert sent a short message saying that it sounded like they had made up their minds and he hoped they would be happy, the kind of response you might send to an acquaintance announcing a vacation, not your parents appending their entire lives. The house sold quickly. A young couple with a baby who loved the neighborhood and the schools and everything Ana and Harold were walking away from. On a cold morning in early May, Ana and Harold packed everything they owned into a rented truck, donated most of their furniture to charity, and drove away from the life they had built over 50 years of marriage. Ana cried for the first hour, then dried her tears and didn't look back. Harold drove with his jaw set, his hands steady on the wheel, and if he felt fear or doubt, he didn't show it. The cabin was worse than Harold remembered. The real estate agent had warned them, had actually tried to talk them out of the purchase, explaining that the structure was unsound, that the roof had multiple holes, that animals had been living inside for years. But nothing prepared them for the reality of standing in front of what was barely more than a pile of rotting wood held together by rusty nails and stubborn hope. The windows were all broken. The door hung at an angle on one hinge, and the porch had collapsed entirely, leaving a gap like a missing tooth. Inside was worse, with bird nests in the rafters, mice scurrying through holes in the floor, and a smell of decay and abandonment that made Anna's eyes water. Harold walked through the structure slowly, testing boards with his weight, examining the framework with the practiced eye of a carpenter who had built and repaired hundreds of homes over his lifetime. Ana watched him, trying to see what he saw, trying to find the hope they had driven 6 hours to claim. When he finally came back out into the sunlight, his face was serious but not defeated. The bones are good, he said. The main supports are solid pine, built back when people knew how to construct things that lasted. Everything else, the walls, the roof, the floor, most of it needs to be replaced. But we can do it. It'll take time, probably a year or more, but we can do it. They spent the first night in their truck, parked beside the cabin, eating sandwiches and looking up at stars so bright and numerous that Ana felt dizzy trying to count them. She had forgotten, living in the suburbs for so long, how dark the night could be, how vast and full of mystery. Harold held her hand as they sat there, and neither of them spoke about the enormity of what they had done, the bridges they had burned, the life they had left behind. There would be time for doubt later, for fear and exhaustion and moments when they wondered if everyone else had been right about their foolishness. But that first night, under those impossible stars, they felt something neither of them had experienced in years. They felt free. The work began the next morning. Harold had brought his tools, the same hammers and saws and levels he had used for decades, and Ana had packed work gloves and determination. They started with clearing the debris, hauling out years of accumulated trash and decay, piling it all beside the cabin to be burned. It took 3 days just to empty the structure, to sweep out the dirt and droppings, to see what they were really working with. Ana found remnants of the cabin's previous life. A tin cup rusted through, a calendar from 1976, a child's toy car with 3 wheels missing. Each item felt like an archaeological discovery, a glimpse into the lives of people who had lived and loved and left this place behind. By the end of the first week, they had stripped the cabin down to its skeleton, removing everything that couldn't be saved, exposing the framework to air and light for the first time in years. Harold worked with careful precision, teaching Ana as they went, showing her how to read the wood, how to tell what was sound and what needed replacing, how to measure twice and cut once. Ana had never done physical labor like this before. She had worked as a teacher for 35 years, had spent her days with books and children and lesson plans, and her body protested every evening with aches and pains that made climbing into their truck bed, where they slept under a tarp stretched over the truck's rails, an exercise in creative positioning and frequent groaning. But there was something deeply satisfying about the work, something primal and right about using her hands to create something real and lasting. Every evening, despite the exhaustion, Ana felt a sense of accomplishment that she had never experienced sitting at a desk or standing in front of a classroom. She was building something, actually physically constructing a home with her own strength and will, and the pride that grew alongside the blisters on her palms was fierce and unexpected. They bought materials from a lumber yard in the nearest town, a place called Pine Ridge about 40 minutes down the mountain. The owner, a man named Chuck with a white beard and suspicious eyes, clearly thought they were crazy when they explained their project. He tried to talk them into hiring contractors, suggesting several local builders who did good work for reasonable prices, but Harold was firm. They would do the work themselves, he explained, because they had the time and the need to make this place theirs in every possible way. Chuck shrugged and sold them what they needed, loading 2x4s and plywood sheets into Harold's truck, offering advice that Harold listened to politely before making his own decisions. Over the following weeks, Chuck's skepticism gradually shifted to interest, and then to something like respect, as Ana and Harold kept coming back, kept buying materials, kept working despite the odds stacked against them. The roof came first because Harold knew that everything else depended on keeping the weather out. They worked for 3 weeks straight, tearing off old shingles, replacing rotted rafters, laying down new plywood and moisture barriers, and finally, carefully, placing each shingle in overlapping rows that would shed rain and snow for decades to come. Ana learned to work on a pitched roof despite her fear of heights, learned to trust her balance and her grip, learned to move carefully and deliberately while Harold worked below, ready to catch her if she slipped. She only fell once, sliding down the slope with a shriek that brought Harold running. But she caught herself on the edge and hauled herself back up with shaking arms and a determination that surprised them both. When the roof was finished, they stood in the cabin during the first rain and watched water stream down the new shingles instead of pouring through holes onto their heads. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental, proof that what they were attempting wasn't just a fantasy but an actual, achievable reality. Summer burned hot and bright in the mountains, and Ana and Harold worked through it with the kind of focus that only comes from having nothing else to do and nowhere else to be. They replaced the walls board by board, installed windows they bought secondhand from a demolition company in Pine Ridge, built a new porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the cabin. Harold taught Ana to use a circular saw to drive nails straight and true, to check for level and square and plumb. Ana proved to have a natural talent for finishing work, for the careful, patient tasks of sanding and painting and making everything smooth and clean. They ate simple meals cooked on a camping stove, bathed in a stream that ran cold and clear behind the cabin, and fell into their truck bed each night too tired to do anything but sleep. It was hard, harder than anything Ana had ever done, but it was also clean in a way her previous life had never been. There were no complicated emotions here, no wondering why her children didn't call or what she had done wrong. There was just wood and nails and the simple satisfaction of watching something broken become whole again. By the end of summer, the cabin was weathertight and structurally sound. They moved inside, sleeping on a mattress on the floor because they hadn't built furniture yet, but it felt like a palace after months in the truck. Harold installed a wood stove he found at an estate sale, running the chimney pipe through the roof with careful attention to safety and clearance. The first time they lit a fire inside, watching flames dance behind the glass door and feeling warmth spread through the single large room, Ana cried again, but this time from joy rather than grief. They spent the fall working on the inside, building a kitchen along one wall with cabinets Harold crafted from pine, installing a sink connected to a rainwater collection system he had designed and built on the roof. They had no electricity yet and wouldn't until the following spring when they could afford to have solar panels installed. But they had kerosene lamps and candles and the fire, and it was enough. More than enough. Ana started a garden in what had been a weed-choked clearing beside the cabin. She dug and turned the soil, pulled rocks and roots, worked compost into the earth until it was dark and rich. She planted vegetables from seeds and seedlings she bought in town, along with wildflower seeds she collected from the meadows surrounding their property. Harold built raised beds and a small greenhouse from salvaged windows, creating a space where they could extend the growing season and start plants early in the spring. The garden became Anna's meditation, her therapy, her daily reminder that growth was possible even in the hardest soil. She learned which plants thrived at this elevation and which ones struggled, learned to recognize the signs of pest damage and disease, learned the patience required to watch something grow from seed to harvest. When she pulled the first carrots from the ground in late September, their orange bodies thick and perfect, she felt a satisfaction that was somehow deeper and more meaningful than anything she had experienced in her 7 decades of life. Winter came hard and fast to the mountains. By November, snow was falling regularly, piling up around the cabin in drifts that reached the windowsills. Ana and Harold had prepared as well as they could, stockpiling firewood that Harold had cut and split from dead trees on their property, canning vegetables from the garden, buying bulk supplies of rice and beans and flour from town before the roads became too treacherous to navigate. They settled in for what Chuck had warned them would be a brutal season, and he wasn't wrong. The cold was relentless, seeping through every gap in the walls despite their careful construction. They learned to dress in layers, to keep the fire burning around the clock, to move carefully on floors that grew slick with frost overnight. The isolation was intense, days and sometimes weeks passing without seeing another human being. The silence broken only by wind and the crack of trees splitting in the cold and the occasional howl of a coyote hunting in the darkness. But something happened during that first winter, something neither Ana nor Harold had expected. They found each other again in a way they hadn't experienced since the early years of their marriage. With no television, no internet, no distractions beyond survival, they talked, really talked, about everything and nothing. Harold told stories from his childhood that Ana had never heard, about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about the father who taught him carpentry and the mother who had died when he was 12. Ana shared memories of her own childhood, her dreams of being a writer before she settled for teaching, her regrets and hopes and fears. They played cards by lamplight, read books aloud to each other from a box of used paperbacks they had bought at a library sale, made love under heavy quilts with a tenderness that felt new despite 50 years together. The forced proximity and shared struggle stripped away the comfortable distance that had crept into their marriage over the decades, leaving them raw and honest and more in love than they had been since their 20s. Christmas came and went without a word from their children. Ana had sent cards in October, including their new address, a post office box in Pine Ridge since they had no mail delivery to the cabin. She checked the box every time they went to town, hoping for something, anything, but there was nothing. On Christmas morning, she and Harold exchanged simple gifts, a new knife for him, a set of watercolors for her, and tried not to think about the grandchildren opening presents in New York and Los Angeles and Seattle, children who barely knew their names. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing the brown earth and then covering it again with fresh powder. By April, the worst had passed, and Ana and Harold emerged from their cabin like bears from hibernation, blinking in the bright sun, eager to start the next phase of their transformation. They had survived, and that survival felt like a victory worth celebrating. Harold installed the solar panels he had ordered over the winter, mounting them on a frame beside the cabin and running wires to a battery bank he had built into a small shed. When the lights came on for the first time, powered by nothing but sun and Harold's ingenuity, Ana clapped her hands and laughed with delight. They had electricity, not enough to run major appliances, but enough for lights and a small refrigerator and Harold's power tools. Ana expanded the garden, doubling its size, adding fruit trees she bought as saplings and berry bushes that would take years to produce, but would eventually provide abundant harvests. She built trellises for beans and tomatoes, planted herbs in spiral patterns that looked beautiful and practical, created paths with stones she collected from the stream. The garden became a work of art, a living sculpture that changed with the seasons and grew more complex and productive each year. By their second summer in the cabin, word had begun to spread about the crazy elderly couple who had rebuilt a ruin in the mountains. Hikers using the trail that passed about a mile from their property would sometimes detour to see the cabin, drawn by rumors and curiosity. Ana and Harold, who had initially valued their solitude, found that they enjoyed the occasional visitors, the chance to share their story and hear the stories of strangers who were walking their own paths through the wilderness. Ana started baking bread every few days, using a sourdough starter she had cultivated and an oven Harold had built into the wood stove. When hikers arrived tired and hungry, she would offer them thick slices with butter and jam made from their own berries, and Harold would invite them to sit on the porch and rest. These encounters were brief but meaningful, moments of connection that reminded Ana and Harold that they weren't completely alone, that the world was still out there, full of interesting people and new possibilities. One afternoon in July, a young couple arrived at the cabin looking exhausted and slightly lost. They had been hiking for 3 days, they explained, and had run out of food that morning due to a miscalculation. Ana fed them lunch, a simple stew made from garden vegetables and canned meat, and listened to their story. They were from Chicago, both engineers, taking 2 weeks off to hike the mountain trails before returning to jobs they found increasingly unfulfilling. As they talked, Ana saw the hunger in their eyes, not for food but for something else, something they couldn't quite name. "Why did you do this?" the young woman asked, gesturing at the cabin, the garden, the obvious evidence of hard work and determination. "I mean, this must have been incredibly difficult. Why go through all this?" Ana glanced at Harold, who was whittling on the porch, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Because we wanted to build something that was ours," she said finally. "We spent our whole lives building things for other people, raising children who don't want us, working jobs that were fine but not fulfilling, living in a place that never quite felt like home. All of this, it's ours. We made it with our own hands, and nobody can take that away from us." The couple left the next morning, but they returned 3 weeks later with 2 friends, asking if they could camp on Ana and Harold's property for a night, promising to leave no trace. Ana agreed, and found herself enjoying the company, the sound of voices and laughter around a campfire. When the group left the next day, they left behind a thank you note and $50 tucked under a rock on the porch. Harold looked at the money and then at Ana. "We could do this more officially," he said. "Offer camping sites, maybe build a couple of small cabins for rent. There's plenty of space, and people clearly want to come here." It was an appealing idea for several reasons, not least because their savings were starting to run low and they needed some kind of income. But more than that, Ana liked the idea of creating something that would bring people to this beautiful place, that would let them share what they had built. They talked it through over several days, considering the logistics and the work involved, and finally decided to move forward. Over the next year, they built 3 small guest cabins on their property, simple one-room structures with beds and with stoves and large windows looking out at the valley. Harold designed them to be comfortable but rustic, places where people could experience the mountains without the full hardship that he and Ana had endured during their first winter. Ana created a garden area for guests to explore, with benches and walking paths and informational signs identifying the various plants. They registered their property as a campground and small lodge with the county, got the necessary permits and insurance, and put up a simple website that Harold learned to build using tutorials from the library in Pine Ridge. They called it Whitman's Rest, and priced it affordably, aimed at hikers and people looking for a quiet retreat rather than luxury amenities. The first booking came in March of their 3rd year, a solo hiker who stayed for 2 nights and left a glowing review online. Word spread, as it does in the small world of mountain enthusiasts and hikers. By summer, they were regularly booked, with guests coming from all over the country to stay in their simple cabins and experience the peace that Ana and Harold had created. The work was constant, cleaning cabins and maintaining trails and making sure guests had everything they needed, but it was good work, purposeful work, and the income covered their expenses and then some. Ana discovered she loved hosting, loved hearing the stories of strangers who came to the mountain carrying their own burdens and hopes. She would invite guests to dinner sometimes, cooking large meals on the propane stove Harold had installed in a small kitchen building, serving vegetables from the garden and meat from the local butcher in Pine Ridge. These dinners became legendary among their repeat guests, evenings of good food and good conversation, where people from different backgrounds and different lives found common ground in the wilderness. Harold was quieter with guests but no less welcoming, offering to guide hikes or teach basic carpentry skills to anyone interested. He built a small workshop beside the main cabin and started crafting furniture from local wood, chairs and tables that he sold to guests, and in a consignment shop in Pine Ridge. His work was simple but beautiful, made with the kind of care and attention that had gone into every aspect of their life on the mountain. By their 4th year, Whitman's Rest had been featured in a hiking magazine and a travel blog that focused on off-the-beaten-path destinations. The attention brought more visitors, more bookings, more people wanting to experience what the elderly couple had created. Ana and Harold found themselves busier than they had been in decades, but it was a different kind of busy, one that felt meaningful and chosen rather than obligatory and exhausting. They rarely thought about their children anymore, or at least they rarely talked about them. The hurt had faded to a dull ache, something they carried but didn't let define them. They had built a new life, created a new family of sorts from the strangers who passed through their mountain sanctuary, and found that they didn't need the approval or presence of their biological children to feel complete. But then, on a crisp afternoon in October of their 5th year on the mountain, 3 cars came up the rough road to their property. Ana was in the garden, harvesting the last of the tomatoes before the first hard freeze, when she heard the engines. Visitors usually hiked in or called ahead if they were driving, so the sound of multiple vehicles was unusual enough to make her pause and watch. The first car that came into view was a black Mercedes, expensive and out of place on the dirt road. Behind it came a silver Lexus, equally impractical for mountain driving, and finally a blue Tesla that looked like it had already suffered some damage to its undercarriage from the rough terrain. Anna's heart began to beat faster, a sick feeling growing in her stomach because she knew, even before the doors opened, exactly who was coming. David emerged first from the Mercedes, dressed in what was probably casual wear for him but looked absurdly formal for the mountains, leather shoes and pressed slacks and a sweater that probably cost more than Anna's entire wardrobe. He looked older than she remembered, gray at the temples, lines around his eyes, but still handsome in that polished way that money could buy. He saw her standing in the garden and froze, his expression shifting through surprise and something that might have been shame. Melissa got out of the Lexus, also dressed inappropriately for the location, her hair perfectly styled and her makeup flawless despite the long drive. She had her phone in her hand, and Ana watched her take a photo of the cabin before she even looked at her mother. Behind Melissa came her husband, whose name Ana could never remember, and their 2 teenagers who looked bored and resentful at having been dragged to this remote location. Robert emerged last from the Tesla with his wife, both of them dressed in the kind of expensive outdoor wear that people who didn't actually spend time outdoors tended to buy, all brand names and technical fabrics that had never seen a real trail. Robert looked the most uncomfortable of the 3 siblings, his face flushed, his hands shoved in his pockets. Ana stood in the garden, dirt on her jeans and under her fingernails, a basket of tomatoes on her hip, and waited. She didn't go to them, didn't smile or welcome them, just stood there and let them come to her. Harold had emerged from the workshop and was walking toward the group, his face carefully neutral, giving nothing away. It was David who spoke first because of course it was David who had always taken charge, always led. "Mom," he said, his voice uncertain in a way Ana had never heard before. We came to see you." Ana set down her basket of tomatoes carefully. "After 5 years," she said quietly. "You came to see us after 5 years." Melissa stepped forward, tears already streaming down her carefully made-up face. "We're sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "We're so sorry. We shouldn't have, we were terrible children." Robert was crying too, silent tears running down his face. "We saw the article," he said. "The one in Mountain Living magazine about this place, about what you've built. We didn't know, we had no idea you were here. what you were doing. Ana felt Harold's presence beside her, solid and steady. She reached for his hand and he took it, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 50-plus years of practice. You didn't know because you didn't ask, Ana said, and her voice was calm, not angry or bitter, just stating a fact. You cut us out of your lives. You decided we weren't worth your time or attention. So we built a new life without you. David looked around at the cabin, the garden, the guest cabins visible in the distance, and Ana could see him calculating, assessing, figuring out what this property was worth. It was such a typical David response that it almost made her laugh. This is incredible, he said. You did all this yourselves? Built it from nothing? From less than nothing, Harold said, speaking for the first time. From a ruin that nobody wanted. We bought it with the money from selling the house you all grew up in. The house none of you cared enough about to even comment on when we told you we were leaving. The afternoon sun was slanting through the valley, painting everything gold and amber. And Ana felt the beauty of the moment even through the complicated emotions swirling in her chest. Her children had come back, but they had come back too late or maybe at exactly the right time, she wasn't sure which. They stood there in the garden, this family that had broken and scattered, and nobody seemed to know what to do next. Melissa's daughter, about 16, broke the silence. This place is actually really cool, she said, looking at her phone screen, presumably at photos she had just taken. You guys really live here? Like all the time? Without Wi-Fi? Despite everything, Ana smiled. We have Wi-Fi now, she said. Satellite internet came 2 years ago. But we lived without it for the first 3 years, and honestly, it was nice. The ice wasn't broken, but it was cracked, and slowly, awkwardly, they all moved toward the cabin. Ana found herself in the strange position of hosting her own children like they were guests, showing them the space she and Harold had created, watching their faces as they processed what their elderly parents had accomplished. She could see their surprise, their disbelief, their dawning realization that maybe their parents weren't the simple, unsophisticated people they had imagined. They stayed for dinner, all of them crowded around the large table Harold had built, eating stew and fresh bread while Ana listened to them talk about their lives. David's marriage was falling apart, she learned. His wife had left him 6 months ago, citing his obsession with work and his inability to be emotionally present. Melissa was struggling with depression, had been for years, felt trapped in her perfect life with her perfect family in her perfect house. Robert's company had been bought out, and while he had made a fortune on paper, he felt lost, uncertain what to do with his life now that the thing he had built was no longer his. They were successful, all 3 of them, in the ways the world measured success. They had money and status and impressive careers. But sitting in the warm glow of the cabin's lights, eating simple food and listening to the wind in the trees, Ana thought they looked hollow, like beautiful shells with nothing inside. They had achieved everything they thought they wanted and found it wasn't enough, and now they were here, in the place they had dismissed, looking for something they couldn't name. Why didn't you tell us? David asked eventually, the question that had been hanging in the air all evening. Why didn't you reach out? Let us know how hard it was, how much you needed us. Ana set down her fork and looked at her oldest son. We did tell you, she said gently. We sent emails and letters. We called and left messages. You didn't respond, any of you. And after a while, we realized something important. We realized that we didn't need you to approve of our choices or to help us or to be part of what we were building. We had each other, and that was enough. Harold added, you taught us something valuable, actually. You taught us that we had spent our whole lives making ourselves small, trying to be the kind of parents you wouldn't be embarrassed by, worrying about what you thought and whether we were good enough. And when you left, when you made it clear we weren't important to you, it forced us to figure out what we were important to. Turns out, we were important to each other. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Melissa was crying again, and Robert looked devastated, and even David seemed shaken, his usual confidence stripped away. Is there a way to, can we be part of this? Melissa asked, gesturing around the cabin. Part of your life again? Ana exchanged a long look with Harold. This was the question they had to answer, the decision that would shape whatever remained of their relationship with their children. It would be easy to say no, to send them away, to protect the peace they had built from the people who had hurt them so deeply. It would also be understandable, justified even. But Ana thought about the guests who passed through Whitman's Rest, strangers who arrived broken and left a little more whole, and she thought about the second chances the mountain had given her and Harold, the opportunity to rebuild not just a cabin but their entire lives. Could she offer less to her own children than she offered to strangers? "You can visit," Ana said finally. "You're welcome here, all of you. But understand something. Harold and I built this life for ourselves, not for you. We're not going to apologize for it or diminish it or make ourselves smaller to make you more comfortable. This is who we are now, and if you want to be part of it, you have to accept that." David nodded slowly. "That's fair," he said. "More than fair, actually." They talked late into the night, old hurts and new understandings, apologies that felt inadequate and forgiveness that came hard. The grandchildren explored the property, their initial boredom giving way to genuine interest as Harold showed them the workshop and Ana taught Melissa's daughter how to identify edible plants in the garden. Robert's wife, previously silent and judgmental, broke down and admitted she had grown up poor, had worked desperately to escape poverty, and had pushed Robert to distance himself from his parents because she was terrified of sliding backward, of being associated with anything that reminded her of where she came from. Ana listened to this confession with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She reached across the table and took the young woman's hand. "I understand," she said. "But you need to know that poverty and simplicity aren't the same thing. We're not poor here. We're rich in ways that have nothing to do with money." The children left the next morning, promising to visit again, to stay in touch, to do better. Ana and Harold stood on the porch and watched them drive away, the expensive cars navigating carefully down the mountain road, and neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Harold put his arm around Anna's shoulders and pulled her close. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked. Ana leaned into his warmth, watching the last car disappear around a bend. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe not. But either way, we'll be okay." And they were okay, better than okay actually. The children did come back, not immediately and not all at once, but gradually, tentatively, like wild animals learning to trust again. David came alone first, 3 weeks after that initial visit, driving up on a Friday afternoon and asking, awkwardly, if he could stay for the weekend. Ana put him in one of the guest cabins and watched him struggle with the simplicity of it, the lack of television and internet and distractions. He spent Saturday morning working with Harold in the workshop, learning to use hand tools he had forgotten existed, and by evening his expensive clothes were covered in sawdust and his face had lost some of its constant tension. Over dinner, David told them about his divorce, the ugly details he had glossed over during the first visit. His wife had been cheating on him for 2 years, he said, with his business partner, and the betrayal had shattered his carefully constructed world. He had thrown himself even harder into work afterward, trying to prove something to someone, he wasn't sure who, and it had nearly destroyed him. His doctor had diagnosed him with high blood pressure and anxiety, had recommended therapy and medication and lifestyle changes. "I kept thinking about you guys," David said, pushing food around on his plate, "about how you just walked away from everything and built something new. I thought you were crazy, but maybe you were the only sane ones in the family." Harold, who had never been one for long speeches, said simply, "It's never too late to start over. We were in our 70s when we did this. You're not even 50 yet." David returned to New York on Sunday evening, but something had shifted in him, something subtle but real. He called them the next week, not a brief, obligatory call but an actual conversation, and Ana found herself talking to him the way she used to when he was young, before success and ambition had made him into someone she barely recognized. Melissa came next, in November, bringing just her daughter and leaving her husband and son at home. The daughter, whose name was Jennifer, had been struggling with anxiety and depression. Melissa confided to Ana, and the therapist had suggested spending time in nature, away from social media and school pressure. Ana took Jennifer under her wing immediately, teaching her to bake bread and identify bird calls and appreciate the silence that had terrified her at first. Jennifer flourished in ways that surprised everyone. Away from her phone and her friends and the constant pressure to perform, she relaxed, laughed, helped Ana in the garden despite the cold weather, pulling up the last of the root vegetables and helping to put the beds to sleep for winter. She followed Harold around like a puppy, asking questions about everything, learning to split wood and identify different types of trees and navigate using a compass and map instead of GPS. On their last evening, Jennifer asked Ana, "Why did you stop talking to Mom and my uncles? Was it because they were bad kids?" Ana considered the question carefully. "They weren't bad kids," she said. "They grew up and got busy with their own lives, which is natural. But somewhere along the way, they forgot that relationships take effort, that you can't just expect people to always be there waiting for you. Your mom didn't stop being my daughter, but she stopped acting like it. And Harold and I had to decide whether we were going to spend our remaining years waiting for scraps of attention or whether we were going to build a life that made us happy." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "I don't want to be like that," she said finally. "I don't want to get so caught up in my own stuff that I forget about the people who matter." "Then don't," Ana said. "It's a choice, sweetheart. Every day you choose what kind of person you want to be." Melissa cried when they left, holding Ana for a long time and whispering apologies that Ana accepted with grace if not complete absolution. Some wounds heal but leave scars, and the years of abandonment weren't erased by a single visit or even several. But it was a start, a foundation they could build on if everyone was willing to do the work. Robert came in December, bringing his wife and staying through Christmas. They helped Harold cut a tree from the forest, a small pine that they decorated with handmade ornaments and strung popcorn. Robert's wife, whose name was Claire, apologized to Ana privately for her previous behavior, for her judgment and her role in pushing Robert to abandon his parents. She talked about her own childhood, about a father who drank and a mother who worked 3 jobs, about growing up in a trailer park and being mocked at school, about the shame that had driven her to create a new identity as far removed from poverty as possible. Ana listened and understood and even empathized, but she also felt a flicker of anger that this woman's insecurities had cost her 5 years with her youngest son. She kept that anger to herself though, because what good would it do now? The past was past, and all they had was the present and whatever future they could build together. Christmas morning was strange and wonderful, opening simple gifts around the wood stove while snow fell outside the windows. Ana had knitted scarves for everyone. Harold had made wooden boxes with each person's name carved into the lid, and the children had brought expensive gifts that seemed out of place in the rustic cabin but were accepted with thanks anyway. They ate a feast Ana and Claire prepared together, turkey and root vegetables from the garden and pies made from preserved berries, and for a few hours it almost felt like a real family gathering, the kind Ana had dreamed about but never quite achieved even before the abandonment. But it wasn't perfect because real life rarely is. David and Robert got into an argument about politics, their voices rising until Harold intervened with a sharp look and a reminder that some things weren't worth fighting about. Melissa spent too much time on her phone despite promising she would disconnect, and her son complained constantly about the lack of entertainment and decent Wi-Fi. There were moments of awkwardness and discomfort, old patterns reasserting themselves, reminders that years of distance couldn't be bridged in a few visits. Still, when they all left the day after Christmas, Ana felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but hope, the possibility that maybe, with time and effort, they could salvage some kind of relationship with their children. It wouldn't be what it had been before, couldn't be, but it might be something new and different and still valuable. The winter passed slowly, with regular phone calls from all 3 children and plans for spring visits. Ana and Harold settled back into their routines, hosting the occasional winter guest, hardy souls who came for snowshoeing and solitude, and maintaining the property against the harsh weather. They talked about their children sometimes, processing the complicated emotions that came with this tentative reconciliation, but mostly they focused on their own lives, their own relationship, the peace they had worked so hard to build. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and emerging green, and with it came a surprise. David called in March to announce that he was quitting his job, selling his apartment in New York, and moving to Pine Ridge. He had found a property just outside town, he explained, a fixer-upper not unlike what they had started with, and he wanted to try living a simpler life, wanted to see if he could find the same kind of peace his parents had found. Anna's reaction was complicated. Part of her was thrilled that her son was making such a drastic change, following their example in a way. But another part of her worried that he was running from his problems rather than solving them, that he was romanticizing their life without understanding the real work and sacrifice it required. She voiced these concerns to David, who listened quietly and then said, "You're probably right. Maybe I am running away. But I think sometimes running away is the first step to running toward something better. And even if I fail, even if I end up going back to New York with my tail between my legs, at least I'll have tried." David moved to Pine Ridge in April, and Ana and Harold helped him settle into his new property, offering advice and occasionally labor when he asked for it, but mostly letting him figure things out on his own. It was harder than he expected. Ana could tell, watching him struggle with tasks that seemed simple but required knowledge and experience he didn't have. He made mistakes, wasted materials, occasionally called Harold in frustration asking for help with problems he couldn't solve alone. But he kept at it, showing a determination that surprised Ana. Her eldest son, who had spent his adult life in boardrooms and expensive restaurants, learned to frame walls and install plumbing and split firewood without destroying his back. He made friends in Pine Ridge, started dating a local teacher who had no interest in his previous life of wealth and status, began to look less like the polished executive who had arrived on their mountain and more like someone who belonged in this landscape. Melissa and Robert didn't make such dramatic changes, but they started visiting more regularly, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Melissa brought Jennifer several times, and the girl continued to flourish, even starting to talk about maybe going to college nearby so she could stay close to her grandparents. Robert started a foundation using some of his money from the company sale, focused on helping disadvantaged kids access technology and education, and he asked Ana to sit on the board, valuing her experience as a teacher. By the second autumn after the reconciliation, Whitman's Rest had become not just a destination for strangers but a gathering place for family. The children came for Thanksgiving, all of them plus partners and grandchildren, and the property rang with voices and laughter in a way it never had before. Ana and Harold had to use the dining room in the main guest cabin to fit everyone, and the chaos of cooking for so many people after years of simple meals for two was overwhelming but also joyful. During dinner, David stood and raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying over the conversation. "To Mom and Dad, who taught us what really matters by showing us rather than telling us. We were terrible children, and you would have been justified in never speaking to us again. But you gave us another chance, and we're going to spend the rest of our lives trying to deserve it." Ana felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. Harold squeezed her hand under the table, and she squeezed back, their private language of support and love. She looked around the table at her family, imperfect and complicated but here, present, trying, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost hurt. But even in this moment of reunion and celebration, Ana was clear-eyed enough to recognize that their life wasn't better because their children had come back. Their life had been complete before the reconciliation, full of purpose and meaning and love. The children's return was an addition, a bonus, but not a necessary component of their happiness. She and Harold had learned to build their joy from their own efforts, their own relationship, their own connection to the land and the life they had created, and that foundation was unshakable regardless of what their children did or didn't do. After dinner, Ana found herself alone on the porch with Claire, Robert's wife, who had been quiet during the meal. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, before Claire spoke. "I need you to know something," Claire said. "I need you to know that what you did here, building this life after we all abandoned you, it changed me. I grew up thinking that security meant money and status, that the only way to be safe was to climb as high as possible and never look down. But watching you and Harold, seeing what you built with almost nothing, it made me realize I've been running my whole life from something that wasn't actually chasing me anymore." Ana didn't respond immediately, letting Claire's words settle in the cold air. "What are you going to do with that realization?" she asked finally. "I'm in therapy," Claire admitted, "working on the shame and fear I've carried since childhood. And Robert and I are talking about scaling back, living more simply, focusing on things that actually matter. We might not go as far as you and Harold did, but we want to move in that direction. Ana put her arm around Claire's shoulders, feeling the younger woman lean into the embrace. The specific choices don't matter as much as the intention behind them, Ana said. Harold and I didn't come here because we thought a cabin in the mountains was inherently better than a house in the suburbs. We came here because we needed to prove to ourselves that we could build something meaningful, that our worth wasn't dependent on our children's approval or anyone else's validation. They stood together on the porch as the party continued inside, and Ana thought about all the paths that had led to this moment. The pain of abandonment, the decision to leave everything behind, the backbreaking work of rebuilding a ruin, the slow discovery that she and Harold were capable of more than they had ever imagined, and now, unexpectedly, a second chance at family on new terms. Winter arrived again, the sixth one Ana and Harold had spent on the mountain, and it felt different from the others. David was nearby now, in Pine Ridge, visiting regularly and sometimes staying in one of the guest cabins when the weather was particularly harsh. Melissa had started a blog about her journey toward better mental health, and she featured her parents' story as part of it, writing honestly about her failures as a daughter and the lessons she was learning from their example. Robert's foundation was thriving, and he had hired Jennifer, Melissa's daughter, as a part-time assistant, giving the girl a purpose and connection to meaningful work. The business continued to grow, with more bookings than ever and a waiting list for the busy summer months. Harold had trained David in some of the maintenance and repair work, and his son helped out regularly, taking pressure off Harold's aging body. Ana had started teaching a weekly cooking class in the summer, showing guests how to prepare simple meals using ingredients from the garden, and she was writing a cookbook based on those recipes, something she worked on during the long winter evenings. They had built something remarkable, not just a business or a beautiful property, but an entire ecosystem of relationships and purpose and meaning. Strangers came and left transformed by the peace of the place and the warmth of Ana and Harold's hospitality. Their children came and continued their own journeys of healing and growth. And at the center of it all, two elderly people who had refused to let heartbreak define them continued to live with intention and joy. One evening in January, Ana and Harold sat by the fire as they had countless times before, comfortable in the silence that came from knowing each other completely. Harold was whittling, his hand still steady despite his 77 years, and Ana was sketching ideas for the spring garden, planning new beds and different vegetable varieties. "Do you ever regret it?" Harold asked suddenly, not looking up from his work. "Any of it? The move, the work, the years we spent alone here before the kids came back?" Ana set down her pencil and considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Not even the hard parts. Especially not the hard parts, actually, because those are what taught us who we really are. The sadness and the loneliness and the physical exhaustion. All of that was worth it to get to this." She gestured around the cabin at the life they had built. "And honestly, if the kids had never come back, I still wouldn't regret it. This was always about us, about what we needed and wanted, not about them." Harold nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good," he said, "because I was thinking we might need to build another guest cabin next summer. We're turning away too many bookings." Ana laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Another cabin? Harold, we're in our 70s. Shouldn't we be slowing down?" "Probably," Harold agreed. "But when have we ever done what we should?" They smiled at each other across the firelight, and Ana felt the same rush of love and partnership she had felt when they were young and just starting out. They had been through so much together, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, and had come out stronger and more connected than ever. Their children had abandoned them, yes, but in doing so had inadvertently given them a gift, the freedom to build a life that was authentically theirs. Spring came again, as it always did, and with it came new guests, new projects, and new growth. David brought his girlfriend to meet them, a quiet woman with kind eyes who taught at the elementary school and volunteered at the animal shelter. Melissa announced she was writing a book about her journey, and could she interview Ana and Harold extensively for a chapter about them. Robert's foundation received a major grant and expanded its programs, and he credited his parents' example as the inspiration for his commitment to helping others. The property itself continued to evolve. Harold built the new guest cabin he had mentioned, with David's help and occasionally with assistance from guests who were handy and wanted to be part of the creation process. Ana expanded the gardens again, adding more perennials and creating a meditation space with benches and carefully placed stones. They installed better solar panels and a more efficient battery system, started keeping chickens for eggs, and planted an orchard of fruit trees that would take years to mature but would eventually provide abundant harvests. They hired a local teenager to help with the heavy work, a boy from Pine Ridge whose father had left and whose mother was struggling to make ends meet. Lucas was 16, quiet and wary at first, but he blossomed under Harold's patient teaching and Anna's warm encouragement. He learned carpentry and gardening and how to interact with guests, and in return they paid him fairly and treated him like family. He started calling them Grandma Ana and Grandpa Harold without being asked, and Anna's heart swelled every time she heard it. One afternoon in August, Ana was working in the garden with Lucas when a familiar car pulled up, David's truck. But when the door opened, it wasn't David who emerged but a young woman Ana had never seen before. She was in her mid-20s, thin and nervous-looking, with a backpack over one shoulder and uncertainty written across her face. "Can I help you?" Ana asked, setting down her trowel and standing up slowly, her knees protesting the movement. The young woman bit her lip. "Are you Ana Whitman?" she asked. My therapist suggested I come here. I read about you online, about what you built here, and I'm going through something similar. My family, they don't want me anymore because I came out as gay and they're very religious and I didn't know where else to go." Ana felt her heart break and mend simultaneously, recognizing in this stranger's face the same lost, hurt expression she had seen in her own mirror years ago. She walked over to the young woman and pulled her into a hug without asking permission, feeling the girl collapse against her with a sob. "You have a place here," Ana said firmly. "For as long as you need it. I'm going to put you in one of the guest cabins, no charge, and you're going to stay here and rest and heal and figure out your next steps. And anyone who tells you that you're not worthy of love because of who you are is wrong. Do you understand me? They're wrong." The young woman, whose name was Sarah, stayed for 2 weeks and left stronger, with a plan and resources and the knowledge that she wasn't alone. But she wasn't the last person to find their way to Whitman's Rest with a similar story. Over the following months and years, Ana and Harold's mountain sanctuary became known as a place where people who had been rejected by their families could come to heal. Some stayed for days, some for weeks, and Ana treated each one with the same fierce protectiveness and unconditional acceptance that she wished her own children had shown her during her time of need. Harold built 2 more cabins specifically for these visitors. People Ana started calling her found family, and they never charged them a penny. The income from regular guests more than covered the costs, and both Ana and Harold felt that this was perhaps the most important work they had ever done, creating a refuge for the rejected, a home for the homeless in spirit if not in body. Their biological children watched this expansion of the family with mixed emotions. David was supportive, even helping to fund some of the improvements needed to accommodate more vulnerable guests. Melissa struggled with what she saw as her parents replacing her and her siblings, though her therapist helped her work through the jealousy and recognize it for what it was, her own insecurity and guilt manifesting as resentment. Robert simply accepted it, seeing it as a natural extension of his parents' generous spirits and finding ways to support the work through his foundation. Ana turned 78, then 79. Harold reached 80 and joked that he was too old to be climbing on roofs anymore, though he continued to do it anyway when necessary. Their bodies were slowing down, aches and pains becoming constant companions, but their spirits remained strong. They had learned to accept help when needed, delegating more of the physical work to Lucas and David and the occasional volunteer who wanted to trade labor for accommodation. The autumn when Ana turned 80 was particularly beautiful, the valley blazing with colors so vivid they almost hurt to look at. The children came for her birthday, along with grandchildren and a few of the found family members who had stayed in touch, and they had a party that spilled out of the cabin and across the property, with a bonfire and music and more food than they could possibly eat. During the party, Jennifer, who was now 21 and studying environmental science at college, asked Ana to talk to everyone about the journey that had brought them here. Ana was reluctant at first, not wanting to be the center of attention on what was supposed to be a celebration. But Harold encouraged her, and eventually she stood beside the bonfire with everyone gathered around and told the story. She talked about the pain of being abandoned, about the decision to leave everything behind, about the backbreaking work and the moments of doubt and the slow discovery that they were capable of more than they had ever imagined. She talked about the peace they had found in simple living, the joy of building something with their own hands, the unexpected gift of the found family that had come to them. And she talked about the reconciliation with their biological children, acknowledging both the joy and the complexity of it, the scars that remained alongside the healing. "The most important thing I learned," Ana said, her voice carrying across the quiet crowd, "is that your worth is not dependent on whether other people choose to love you. Harold and I could have spent our remaining years bitter and broken, waiting for our children to decide we mattered. Instead, we decided we mattered regardless of what they thought, and we built a life that reflected that belief. And ironically, that's what eventually brought them back. Not our neediness or our waiting, but our refusal to let their rejection define us." She looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight, at the mixture of family and strangers who had become family, at the cabins and gardens and life they had created from nothing. "This place," she continued, "it's not just a property or a business. It's a testament to the fact that it's never too late to start over, that you're never too old or too hurt or too broken to build something beautiful. And I hope that everyone who comes here, whether you're related to us by blood or by choice, I hope you leave knowing that you have that power too." There wasn't a dry eye around the bonfire when she finished, and Ana sat down quickly, embarrassed by the attention and the emotion. But Harold squeezed her hand and whispered, "I'm proud of you," in her ear. And that was all the validation she needed. The years continued to pass, as they do, and Ana and Harold grew older but not diminished. They celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary surrounded by family both biological and chosen, cutting a cake that Ana had baked herself and dancing slowly to music from the record player David had brought them. They watched Lucas graduate from high school and then from college, coming back to work at Whitman's Rest full-time as their official property manager. They saw Jennifer finish her degree and start a career in environmental conservation, frequently bringing student groups to the property for education about sustainable living. David's relationship with the teacher, whose name was Patricia, blossomed into marriage, and they bought the property adjacent to Ana and Harold's, expanding the sanctuary with David's carpentry skills and Patricia's gift for hospitality. Melissa published her book and it became a surprise bestseller, leading to a second book and a podcast about family healing and reconciliation. Robert's foundation grew to serve thousands of children across the country, and he never failed to credit his parents' example as his inspiration. But more than any of these external successes or reconciliations, what mattered most to Ana and Harold was the life they had built together. The partnership that had not only survived but strengthened through abandonment and heartbreak and the hard work of starting over. They still sat by the fire on winter evenings, still worked in the garden on summer mornings, still welcomed strangers with warm food and warmer hearts. On Anna's 85th birthday, Harold gave her a gift he had been working on for months in secret, a book he had bound himself containing photographs and stories from their years on the mountain. Every page was a memory, a moment they had shared, evidence of the life they had built. The final page contained a photo from their first day at the cabin, standing in front of the ruin with dirt on their faces and hope in their eyes, and below it Harold had written in his careful handwriting, "We were never abandoned. We were freed." Ana cried reading those words, understanding their truth in a way she couldn't have years earlier. Her children's rejection, as painful as it had released her and Harold from obligations and expectations that had kept them small and safe and ultimately unfulfilled. It had forced them to choose themselves, to build a life based on their own values and desires rather than on what they thought they should want. The reconciliation with their children was good, valuable, meaningful, but it was not the source of their happiness. That came from within, from the partnership between two people who had loved each other for more than 6 decades, from the work of their hands and the values of their hearts, from the choice they made every day to build something beautiful regardless of who was watching or approving. As Ana sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the valley they had come to know so intimately, she thought about all the versions of herself she had been over 85 years. The young woman who had married Harold full of dreams and innocence. The mother who had poured everything into her children, believing that was her highest purpose. The abandoned parent, heartbroken and lost. And finally, this version, the woman who had learned to build her own paradise, who had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, who had created a refuge not just for herself but for dozens of others who needed to know that rejection was not the end of the story. Harold came out and sat beside her, moving slowly now, his 87 years showing in every careful motion. But his hand, when it found hers, was still strong, still steady, still the anchor it had always been. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into night, listening to the sounds of their found family preparing dinner in the main cabin, secure in the knowledge that they had built something that would outlast them, something that mattered. No regrets? Harold asked the same question he had asked years earlier. Ana smiled, squeezing his hand. Not a single one. And it was true. Every moment of pain, every instant of doubt, every backbreaking hour of labor had been worth it to arrive at this place, this life, this sense of peace and purpose that no amount of their children's approval could have given them. They had turned a ruin into a paradise, not through magic or luck, but through love and determination and the refusal to let heartbreak have the final word. As the stars emerged one by one overhead, Ana and Harold Whitman sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the life they had created, and knew with certainty that they had succeeded beyond any dream they could have imagined on that cold morning when they had driven away from everything they knew. They had not just survived abandonment, they had transformed it into liberation, had turned their children's rejection into the catalyst for their own rebirth. And in doing so, they had created not just a paradise for themselves, but a beacon of hope for everyone who would come after them, proof that it was never too late to start over, never too late to build something beautiful, never too late to choose yourself and discover that you were enough all along.